The most fundamental thing to your training that I could possibly teach you is just understanding how obsessed a lot of people are with learning little tactics and techniques. And they don't want to really get the skills. They just want some kind of a script. Companies make this mistake with sales teams. Even our government's made this mistake for decades. If I give you a flight checklist for a 737 aircraft, it has every detail and every step on how to get that aircraft off the ground. But holding that flight checklist does not make you a pilot. What that comes down to is your level of individual skill. Since I train our government in interrogation and interrogation operations, me giving you an interrogation manual doesn't make you an interrogator. So having access to the information or memorizing the information does not give you the skills. This is about skill. And what I'm going to give you is going to change the way you see the world and change the way that you interact with the world. So first, let's understand some core concepts that you've probably never heard before when it comes to influence and persuasion. Our brains evolved over the course of millions of years, and they evolved in layers. One interesting way to look at this is that we may have a reptilian brain, a mammalian brain, and a human brain, or this neocortex on the top of our head, which is Latin for new cover. The human part of our brain is what most people try to influence. But in reality, there's a part of your brain called the basal ganglia. It's a collection of several different pieces, but that's where most of our decisions are made. It's where we process emotions and where we secretly make decisions. So when a person decides to do something, they're making that decision probably down in this lower mammalian part of the human brain, and then rationalizing that after the decision's been made in the upper part or the human part of their brain. When our ancestors were living in these little tribal communities thousands of years ago, the average tribe of people was about 125, and everybody had specific jobs. But the most important thing that's still relevant in your life today is that our ancestors passed things down to us. This is why kids are naturally afraid of snakes or spiders. When we grow up knowing how to spot animals at a distance, we grow up sometimes being able to spot poisonous plants because our ancestors gave things to us to help us survive. That stuff is written in the code of our DNA, and it's built into our brain. And there are things we can't meditate our way out of. There are things we can't, like affirmation, our way out of. And there are things that are hardwired. We cannot choose to go in there and turn off those apps that are running. What does this mean for us? We can get stuff passed down to us from someone as close to us as one of our grandparents. Traumas and fears and things like that. And the reason this is critically important for your understanding and influence and persuasion is those things that are written into our mammalian brain. They make psychological loopholes in our mind. And these loopholes can be used by anyone. I want to show you how these loopholes work, and then I'm going to give you access to these 4 loopholes. This isn't a normal run-of-the-mill persuasion program. I'm not here to teach you how to change people's mind. I'm teaching you how to restructure a person's full behavior. And we're going to do that by changing the person's identity and the person's impulse, while most people are focused on simply changing little ideas. There's one model that I train all operatives with, and this is called the PCP model. The PCP model forms the basis of what makes influence possible. PCP stands for perception, context, and permission, in that order. So perception means a person's perception about what's going on, or maybe the meaning of something that's going on, starts to change. Then if a context changes, this makes different behaviors okay. In certain contexts, I may not be able to do something, but in another context, that behavior might be reasonable and even expected. Finally, we have permission. Permission is the most important thing here, because as an operative, what you're mostly going to be transferring to other people is not a bunch of covert skills, but you're transferring permission. And we're going to unpack this in just a few minutes. But keep that in mind, write this down in your notes. I will be transferring permission to others. Understanding this PCP model helps you to understand how all influence works. And I mean all influence. Everything you've done, whether you bought something from an infomercial, someone's being talked into joining a cult, someone's getting talked into buying a new car or buying a new house, this all follows the PCP model. Someone's perception gets changed. This leads to the discovery that the context is different than they think it is. And finally, a person or a thing gives them the final permission to take that final step with influence and persuasion. The next fundamental model that you need to understand is called the FATE model. FATE is an acronym for focus, authority, tribe, and emotion. These are the 4 things that kept your ancestors alive, and these are the 4 things that they passed down into your brain. The first one is the ability to focus on something, especially to focus on things that are different than usual. Back in these tribal days, if you can imagine one of the tribal members who went out and collected berries every day, and her job was to bring those berries back to the tribe. Now, I just want you to put yourself in that person's shoes for just a minute. It's a few thousand years ago. You've got these berries over your shoulder. You're coming back to your tribe, and all of a sudden, this bush that's beside you, you've been walking past this bush every day for years and years. But all of a sudden, behind that bush, you hear a stick snap. Is it a predator? Is something about to attack you? So the ancestors passed this down because hearing something unexpected, seeing something unexpected automatically generates focus. No matter if we try not to focus on it, we try not to look at it, these are automated behaviors. So are the other ones that we're going to talk about. But keep in mind, this is why these things become psychological loopholes. So that twig snapping behind the bush is novelty. And what we mean by novelty is something that we did not expect to happen, and it's something that breaks from our expectation of what we think should happen in a situation. So when we talk about things like novelty, the reason novelty is so important is it manufactures instant and immediate focus. Novelty creates focus. That person, that tribes person, much like us, if we see something very unexpected, or if we see something we're definitely not expecting to see, focus is manufactured, not chosen. We don't decide to focus. Focus is automatically created. So why is this powerful? All of these 4 things on the FATE model are about the mammalian brain, not the upper part of the brain, the middle part of the mammalian brain. So here's how I want you to view this. All of these things on the FATE model are things that a person cannot consciously choose to not do. These are automatic and impulse actions and reactions in human behavior. So the more you're able to understand this FATE model, the more power you're going to have on creating automated behavioral responses in people, which means you can influence behavior and predict it. Let's move to the next item on the FATE model, which is authority. And what we mean by authority is our responsiveness to a perceived or legitimate authority figure. Let's keep using this model of this person that lived in a tribe thousands of years ago. If this person in the tribe refused to listen to the tribal leader, what would happen? Their head would get chopped off, they get thrown off a cliff, they get socially outcast. Lots of things could happen to them that would lead to 2 consequences. They either wouldn't be able to replicate, like they wouldn't find a partner and mate, or they would die. We have an unconscious, instant response to when we see a real or perceived authority figure. So our ancestors gave this to us, and it's not something we can really choose to turn off or to delete out of our operating system. Now that you know how powerful authority is, you'll be able to leverage this in conversations. And we're going to unpack authority in just a few modules. But in the meantime, what I really want you to understand about authority is that when a person encounters another person that they perceive as an authority figure, they cannot choose their way or think their way out of being hyper responsive to that level of authority. And how do we respond to authority? We respond with usually compliance. We get more suggestible, and we're more likely to go along with the person that is a perceived authority figure. Now let's talk about T for tribe. So following our example, this person who lived thousands of years ago, if they broke away from what the tribe was doing, or if they decided to deviate from that tribe, or if they pissed off a lot of those people in that tribe, they'd be in big trouble. They'd be in trouble that could jeopardize their life, their children's lives, their access to food and resources. So these social networks were a big, big deal to our ancestors. So again, they were passed down and programmed into our DNA. When a person feels like tons of people are making a specific choice, which we would now consider to be tribe, which can even bleed into social media and what we see online. But when we see a person, and especially a group of people, make a large choice like this, we're exponentially more likely to follow that lead. So now you understand focus, authority, and tribe, and all three of those things have the capability to completely override most of our conscious reasoning and conscious processes in our brain and create automation and impulse instead of decisions. Finally, let's move to the E for emotion. And by emotion, I mean the behavioral patterns that we pick up on through our lives. And here's how our ancestors passed that down to us. Our ancestors were hurt by something and they decided not to do it anymore, so they lived a longer time. So they passed that down to us. When we're a kid, we touch a stove, it's hot, and it burns our hand, we say, wow, I'm not going to do that again. So these behavioral patterns throughout our lives dictate much of what we do throughout our day, and we don't really realize how powerful these things are when it comes to conversations. Anytime we're experiencing emotions, we're more likely to be compliant, we're more likely to be suggestible, and we're more likely to make a decision irrationally. So a lot of our decisions are made by emotion, and then we'll logically take credit for it or rationalize the action later on. So putting this all together, if you're wanting to get some kind of extreme compliance out of another person, you know that you're going to have to do something that manufactures instantaneous focus. You're going to have to trigger an authority response of compliance or suggestibility. You'll also have to make that person feel like several people are making that decision, or that making this decision is going to bring them into a new social group or a tribe. Finally, you understand this thing about behavioral patterns throughout our lives. If we do something that gets us social consequences or physical consequences, we're less or more likely to do it based on the rewards and consequences that we get. And if you're able to predict those patterns and spot them, which I'm going to teach you how, you'll be more influential than 99% of people in the world. All of us inherited the fate model from our ancestors. And I don't just mean humans. The fate model works on humans and most mammals in the world. That's why it's so powerful. We're targeting the low-level, powerful part of the brain. And the reason that this is the most powerful part of the brain is because that runs the real show. The brainstem, the spinal cord are in charge no matter what anybody says. And if you don't believe me, you should challenge yourself to hold your breath until you die. And I don't mean you should try that, but what's going to happen is your spinal cord's going to say the upper part of the brain is making a dumb decision, and it's going to knock you out, or it's going to force you to breathe even if it's against your will. It's going to force you to breathe. And I want you to understand how powerful these deep brain structures are when it comes to influence and persuasion. They take charge over the upper part of the brain, and it's not the other way around. 99% of people out there training influence and persuasion are teaching people how to influence the upper and frontal part of our brain. This is the part of our brain where we have something called a critical factor. This critical factor is the thing that identifies I'm being influenced, I'm being told to do something, and that part of the brain can resist. The lower part of the brainstem and the spinal cord, these things work on impulse, automatic reactions with no resistance, and they work immediately. So now you understand the fate model. It's the keys to understanding how to create the most powerful influence in the world. In the next module, I'm going to show you how normal people were made to commit murder using something like this in under an hour. So let's move into module 2 right now.